11:20 at night. A federal highway in Colorado, empty in both directions. Blue and red lights come on behind a black government SUV. The woman driving doesn't panic. She pulls over, hands on the wheel, waits. A flashlight hits her face. No greeting, just a handout. She gives him her license, her registration, and a federal identification card. He looks at it. 2 seconds. His eyes move across her name, across her rank, across 22 years of service printed in small, clean letters. And he sets it down and asks if she's been drinking. She passes every test he gives her, every single one, perfectly. He writes the ticket. She takes it, says nothing, drives away, and behind her, with the taillights already gone, Sergeant Cormac Deaver picks that federal ID up one more time, reads it again, nods. He doesn't know his body camera is still running. She wasn't supposed to be on that road. That's the thing nobody mentions afterward. The small decisions. The ones that feel like nothing until they become everything. Renata Osei had planned to leave Pueblo by 9 o'clock. She'd packed her bag at 8:30, said her goodbyes, walked to the parking lot under a sky that was already going dark at the edges. But then Colonel Whitfield had one more question about the Thursday briefing. Then the facilities coordinator needed 2 signatures, not 1. Then the coffee machine in the conference room started making a sound that nobody could explain, and everybody felt the need to discuss for longer than any coffee machine deserved. So 9 became 10. Became 10:40. And 10:40 became the reason everything changed. Not dramatically, not with warning, just the slow, invisible way that most important things begin. She drove the way she did everything, deliberately, both hands on the wheel at the position she'd learned 2 decades ago and never stopped using. Eyes forward. Speed exactly at the limit, not a single mile over. Mirrors checked every 8 seconds. The kind of driver who doesn't grip tighter when roads get dark, who doesn't speed up to get the dark over with, who understands that the details are where things go wrong, and that going wrong at 60 miles an hour on a federal highway in Colorado at 11 p.m. has consequences she'd seen up close before. The road was empty, that specific kind of empty that only happens after 11 at night, when winter is still thinking about leaving, but hasn't quite made its decision yet. The mountains were shapes in the dark, suggestions of something massive, the kind of landscape that reminds you how small you are without being cruel about it. The radio was off. Renata didn't need noise to feel comfortable in silence. She'd learned that a long time ago, in places considerably louder than this. You learn, eventually, to carry your own quiet with you. Not need the world to fill in what's already there. She was thinking about Derek. Not worrying, just thinking. He'd called that morning from campus. Talked for 12 uninterrupted minutes about a history professor he'd decided was secretly a genius. The kind who seemed boring for the first 3 weeks, and then said one thing that rearranged how you understood everything else. About a dining hall that served surprisingly decent jerk chicken on Thursdays. About whether he should switch his minor from economics to political science, and whether that was a practical decision or an interesting one, and whether those 2 things could ever be the same. 12 minutes of a 19-year-old being 19. She'd sat at her desk on the base and let every single word wash over her like something warm, like standing in the first real sunlight after a long winter. He was going to drive home 400 miles alone. His first long drive without her in the passenger seat, and she was fine. She was fine. He was a careful driver. She'd made sure of that. 2 years of sitting in the passenger seat through every practice run. Not with a white-knuckle grip on the door handle, but with genuine calm. Teaching him not just the mechanics, but the philosophy of it. Announce your movements. Check the blind spot twice. Never assume another driver sees you. Respect the road because the road doesn't care who you are. He was ready. She knew he was ready. She was thinking about him anyway. The way mothers think about their children on quiet roads at night. Not with fear exactly. With something that lives right next to love. Something that knows the world is large and roads are dark, and being ready is not the same as being guaranteed. She was thinking about that. And then the lights came on behind her, blue and red, in the rearview mirror, the specific rhythm that nobody ever fully gets used to, no matter how many times they've seen it from the driver's seat. Something in the brain just responds. Something old and alert that was built for exactly this, for recognizing a signal that means stop. That means your autonomy just changed. That means the next few minutes are no longer entirely yours. Renata took one breath, even, deliberate. The breath she'd learned to take before entering rooms where things could go wrong fast. And she pulled over. Not slowly, not suspiciously slow. Exactly the way she'd been trained to pull over. She chose a section of shoulder wide enough to be safe for both vehicles. She put the car in park. She turned on the hazard lights. Then both hands went back to the wheel. Visible, still, exactly where they needed to be. She watched in the mirror as the officer's door opened. The interior light of the cruiser blinked on for a moment, then off. He was tall. The walk of a man who had been the largest physical presence in most situations for most of his adult life, and had stopped noticing that this was something he carried. His hand wasn't on his holster, but it wasn't far from it. She noted that. She noted everything. Not from anxiety, from training, from 2 decades of understanding that in situations where things can go wrong, the person who has been paying attention has the only real advantage. He came to the driver's side. No greeting. Flashlight directly into her face, without warning, without the standard courtesy of angling it down first. Straight in. She didn't flinch. License and registration. Not a question. Not even in the neighborhood of a question. The tone of a man who had given this particular command several thousand times and had long since stopped thinking of it as a request. Renata kept her hands on the wheel. "Good evening, officer." Steady voice. Not warm, not cold. Measured in the way of someone who has spoken in front of hostile crowds and remained measured. "Before I reach for anything, I want to let you know that my registration is in the glove compartment on the passenger side, and my license is in my jacket inside pocket." A pause from him. Brief. "Go ahead." She moved slowly, announced each motion before making it. Right hand leaving the wheel, opening the jacket, extracting the license, then reaching across the glove compartment, opening it, taking out the folder. Inside the folder, registration, vehicle insurance, and her federal employee identification card. She handed all 3 to him. He took them without a word, tilted the flashlight to look. License first, then registration. Then his eyes dropped to the federal identification card and stopped. 2 seconds, maybe closer to 3. Long enough to read it, long enough to understand what it said, long enough for a man who had been doing this for 16 years to know exactly what he was holding and what it meant. Then he set it with the other documents and said, "Have you been drinking tonight, ma'am?" And here is where the story actually begins. Not with the stop, not even with the lights in the mirror here, with this question. Asked after those 2 seconds. Asked by a man who had just read a federal identification card and chosen to proceed as though he hadn't. Because that choice, that small, quiet, seemingly unremarkable choice, is the thing that everything else will hinge on. Tonight. Not in this moment, on this shoulder of road, but in a courtroom. In front of 12 people. In 11 seconds of footage that nobody in the Pueblo Police Department went looking for, because nobody wanted to find it. "I have not," Renata said. "Where are you coming from this evening?" "A work meeting in Pueblo. I'm returning to my base." "Which base?" she told him. He nodded the way people nod when they're not processing what they're hearing. The nod of a man who has already decided something and is collecting detail to fill in around the decision. "You seemed a little unfocused back there. Eyes a little glassy." Renata looked at him. Officer. Not sharp. Not confrontational. Just clear. "May I ask what specific observation prompted this stop?" He shifted his weight. "I observed your vehicle drifting between lanes." "I was not drifting. That's my observation, ma'am." She let that sit for exactly 1 second, because this was the moment. A specific type of moment that she had been in variations of before, where arguing the observation gets you nowhere, because the observation isn't the point. The observation is the door. What's behind the door is something else. She had learned not to fight the door. She had learned to document what was behind it. "What would you like me to do?" she asked. "Step out of the vehicle." She paused. Not from hesitation, from precision. She wanted to be certain she understood the request before responding to it. "On what grounds?" "Field sobriety evaluation. I've been cooperative. I've provided all requested documentation. I haven't been drinking, and I've told you that clearly." She kept her voice at the same measured register, not rising. "Can you tell me what specific indicator has led you to believe an evaluation is warranted?" He took a step closer to the window. "I don't need to justify a lawful order." "You're right," she said. "You don't need to justify it to me." She reached into her jacket pocket, slowly. "I stated the motion before making it, but I'm going to document this interaction." She held up her phone, screen already recording. Something moved across his face, quick, almost invisible, but she caught it. The micro-expression of a man recalculating, reassessing, seeing the camera and doing the fast arithmetic of what that means. The arithmetic did not produce the result that should have followed. He didn't step back, didn't reconsider, didn't find a reason to end the stop gracefully. He said, "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am." And Renata opened the door. She stepped out into the cold night air of a Colorado highway, stood straight, not stiff, not performatively upright, just her full height. The posture she'd carried for 22 years, in and out of uniform, in and out of rooms where she was the only woman, the only black woman, but the only person who had arrived through a door that wasn't built for her. She had learned that you do not make yourself smaller to make others more comfortable. She had learned this the hard way, and she had learned it well enough that it was no longer effort, it was just how she stood. Deaver looked at her, all of her, and something moved across his face again. Something more complicated this time. The expression of a man who had come to a stop expecting one kind of encounter, and was now having a different kind of encounter and hadn't caught up yet. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "Walk this line for me." 11 minutes. That's how long the field sobriety test took. Walk a straight line, turn, walk back. Follow the light with your eyes. Stand on one leg for 30 seconds. She did every single thing he asked, without hesitation, without the faintest wobble. The line was walked perfectly. The turn was executed with military precision that probably looked, to Deaver, like it was designed to make a point. It wasn't. This was simply how Renata Ose moved when she moved with intention, which was always. The eye-tracking portion. She followed the light, both I know nystagmus, no jerking, smooth and controlled the one-leg stick stand 30 seconds, then 30 more when he asked her to repeat it. She passed every component, completely, definitively, without ambiguity. Dever lowered his clipboard, walked back to his cruiser without speaking. Renata stood on the shoulder of the highway in the night air, hands at her sides, phone recording, the hazard lights of her government SUV clicking their patient orange rhythm into the dark. She waited. She had waited in worse places for longer. He came back with a citation slip. He held it out without making eye contact. She took it with her left hand. Read it. Failure to maintain lane. A $175. Issued by Sergeant C. Deaver. Badge number 4471, Pueblo Police Department. She folded the slip precisely and placed it in her breast pocket. Then she looked at him. Not with anger. Anger would have been easier, actually. Anger would have been something he could respond to, could document, could use. She gave him nothing he could use. Just looked for 3 seconds. Long enough to be deliberate, short enough to be measured. Then she got back in her car, buckled her seatbelt, checked the mirror, signaled, pulled back onto the highway at exactly the speed limit. The cruiser's lights disappeared behind her. She drove. Now, before we follow her home, we have to go back to the specific moment when Cormac Deaver held her federal identification card at that window, because his body camera was running. Department policy since 2019. Activates automatically when the emergency lights come on. Records everything within its field of view. He knew this. Had known it for 5 years. Had stopped thinking about it the way you stop thinking about the shoes on your feet. Background. Automatic. Already part of the scene. The camera captured this sequence. Dever receives the documents, reviews the license, reviews the registration. His eyes move to the federal identification card. His head tilts fractionally, the way a person tilts their head when they're reading something closely. 2 seconds pass, maybe 3. Then he sets the federal ID with the others and asks about alcohol. The stop proceeds. 11 minutes and 22 seconds. Renata drives away. Her taillights shrink and disappear around a gentle curve, and then Deaver moves back towards cruiser. On the window ledge where he'd staged the documents during the stop, one item has slid slightly to the edge. The federal identification card. He picks up the stack, sorts through them to organize his incident log. He separates the federal ID, looks at it again, reads it. His head does the same small tilt. He nods once, a single small, barely perceptible nod of recognition, sets it down, reaches for his citation book. 11 seconds. That's the duration of that sequence. Nobody in the Pueblo Police Department would look for this footage, because nobody would want to find it. But it existed. It was there, sitting in the department's digital storage system, time-stamped and preserved by the same automatic protocol that had made Deaver forget it was recording. It would be found later. by someone who was specifically looking for it. But that comes later. First, you need to understand who Cormac Deaver was. Not who he became on that highway. Who he was before. 16 years ago, Cormac Deaver walked into the Pueblo Police Department for his first day with handshake that was too firm and boots that were too new and a conviction that was absolutely, genuinely real. He was 28 years old. He'd grown up 20 miles east of Pueblo, son of a mechanic and a school cafeteria supervisor who had managed to give him and his sister a childhood without significant gaps. Not wealthy, not poor. Solidly in the middle of the kind of life where you understood that the things you got were things you worked for. He'd wanted to be a cop since he was 11, not because of television, but because of Officer Marcus Webb, who had come to his school every fall for 3 years running and talked to his class about what the job actually was. Not the chase scenes, not the drama, the actual daily work of being a person that a community could call when things went wrong. Webb had made it sound like something worth doing. Deaver had believed him, and for the first several years, the job was what Webb had described. It was hard and underpaid, and often frustrating and occasionally frightening, and it required more patience than Deaver had sometimes thought he possessed. But it was real. It was concrete. At the end of most days, he could point to something he'd done or prevented or helped untangle and say, that mattered. He'd been good at it. His early supervisors had noted his instincts, his attention to detail, his genuine interest in the people he was supposed to protect. Garrett, his first partner, had once told him he was going to end up being the kind of cop that people actually remembered, the kind that made the job look like what it was supposed to be. That was a long time ago. Somewhere in the 16 years between that first day and this Tuesday night, the thing Garrett had seen in him had gotten buried. Not suddenly, not in one defining moment of corruption or cruelty. Slowly, in layers. The way sediment builds. A department culture that rewarded certainty over accuracy and authority over judgment. Supervisors who looked away from complaints that should have required looking toward. A union structure designed to protect the institution, regardless of what the institution had done. A case after case where the effort to do the right thing collided with the machinery of the right thing being inconvenient. And the machinery won. A marriage that ended not in a fight but in a conversation it was somehow worse than a fight would have been. Karen sitting across the kitchen table and saying, I don't know who you are anymore, Cormac. And the worst part being that he hadn't known what to say in response. Because he didn't entirely disagree. A son who called less, then texted less, then sent shorter texts. A body that was more tired than it used to be, and a job that felt less like what Webb had described, and more like a script he'd memorized so thoroughly he'd stopped noticing he was reciting it. He'd received 4 complaints in 3 years, all of them from Black or Latino drivers. All of them late-night stops. All of them resolved quietly, internally, in the specific way that institutions resolve things when resolving them means looking at themselves. Nobody had called him in. Nobody had pulled his records. Nobody had said, Cormac, there is a pattern here and we need to talk about it. Nobody had said stop, so he hadn't stopped. He'd just kept going. Kept running the same stops the same way. Kept trusting the instincts that he had stopped examining. Kept being the kind of cop that the people above him found convenient, showed up on time, did the paperwork, never caused scenes that would require their attention. He'd become exactly the kind of cop that Officer Marcus Webb, standing in a 5th grade classroom 25 years ago, had not been describing, and he didn't know it. That was perhaps the most important thing. He genuinely, completely did not know it. On the night he stopped Renata Osei, Cormac Deaver had been parked on the shoulder of Federal Route 50 since 9:45 p.m. His 3rd stop of the night had been a false alarm. A car with one taillight that turned out to belong to a retired teacher, Eloise, who had not known the light was out and had been genuinely grateful when he told her. Since then, nothing. The coffee in the cup holder had been hot when he bought it at 9:15. Now it was the temperature of something that had given up on being what it started out as. His phone had 3 notifications, all from his divorce attorney's office. He didn't open them. He'd learned that opening them at work made the rest of the shift worse, and not opening them gave him a few more hours of something that wasn't quite peace, but was at least quiet. He looked at the road. Dark, still. Headlights coming and going with the irregular rhythm of a highway at this hour. He wasn't thinking about anything with specific intention. which was its own kind of problem. A man with nothing particular on his mind, and a badge on his chest, and 16 years of being told his instincts were good. When the black SUV with government plates came around the curve from the east, Dever watched it pass, clean, in lane, moving at the speed limit. Nothing unusual. He pulled out anyway. Because the shift was slow and his coffee was cold, and was something about that particular car on that particular road at that particular hour that his gut told him was worth a look. He had trusted that gut for 16 years. It had not been held accountable for what it told him. The lights came on. She didn't know any of this yet. She didn't know about the 4 complaints. Didn't know about the culture that had built itself carefully around Dever for 16 years, creating a man-shaped space where consequences should have been. Didn't know about his son's shorter texts. Didn't know about Karen at the kitchen table, with her hands flat and her voice level saying, "I don't know who you are anymore." She knew what she could see. A tall man with a flashlight, documents in his hand. 2 seconds of his eyes on her federal identification card. That 2 seconds, that was what she knew. And that 2 seconds was enough. She got home at 12:51 a.m. The apartment was quiet in the specific way of a space that has someone's absence in it. Derek's room had a lamp on under the door. He'd left it on when he went back to school after the fall break, and she hadn't turned it off. Wasn't sure why. It just seemed like the kind of thing to leave. She set her bag on the chair by the door, took off her jacket, sat at the kitchen table, didn't turn on additional lights, didn't make tea, didn't do the things a person does when they're processing something and need to stay busy. She sat in the kitchen light from the hallway, on the quiet. The citation was in her breast pocket. She took it out and smoothed it flat on the table. Read it again in the half-dark. Failure to maintain lane. She thought about his face when she'd stepped out of the car. That flicker of recalculation. That brief expression of a man who had arrived expecting one kind of encounter and found a different kind and hadn't adjusted fast enough to hide the adjustment. She thought about the 2 seconds when he'd held the federal ID. She thought about the 4 complaints because she knew about them. Not through access to his personnel file, she didn't have that. But the military legal community and the civilian law enforcement community overlapped in specific ways in a city this size. Information moved through professional networks, the way water moved through soil, slowly and invisibly until it was everywhere. Her attorney, Vivian Okafor, had mentioned Cormac Dever's name once, months ago, in a different context, just mentioned. Just the name attached to a pattern that had been noted by the people who noticed these things. 4 complaints. 3 years. All late-night stop. All drivers who looked a certain way. All resolved. All gone. She thought about Derek. She let herself think about it fully this time. Not the managed version, not the version where she told herself he was ready and capable and had good judgment. The real version. The one that lived in the part of her that no amount of training or rank could entirely reach. Derek, her son. 19 years old, 6 feet 1 inch, same as his father whom she hadn't spoken to in 11 years. A laugh that still surprised her sometimes, with how much of her own father's laugh was in it. A habit of calling every Sunday without fail, of texting when he arrived somewhere new, of saying love you. Before he hung up with the casual ease of someone who had never been taught that love was something you needed to be strategic about saying. He was going to drive home in 6 days. Alone. On a federal highway. At night, probably, because he liked night driving. Said the roads were less crowded, more like they belonged to whoever was on them. And if blue and red lights appeared in his rearview mirror, Derek wouldn't have her training, wouldn't have 22 years of learning exactly how to move in situations where moving wrong could cost you everything. Wouldn't have the specific, earned knowledge of how to announce your movements, how to keep your voice level even when your hands want to shake, how to document. How to be unassailable in your conduct while someone else is given the latitude to be assailable in theirs. Derek would just be her son. Young, alone, on a road in the dark. And if something happened and there was no record, she knew exactly how that ended. She had known since she was young enough to understand what kind of world she lived in. She could let it go. That option was real. She thought about it with genuine honesty. The way she'd been trained to examine all options regardless of whether she liked them. Pay the $175. Chalk it up to a Tuesday night that went the way. Too many Tuesday nights went for too many people. Move on. She had more important demands on her time and energy than a traffic citation from a man who would forget her face by morning. She could let it go. And the thing that stopped her wasn't dramatic. Wasn't a speech that formed itself in her head. Wasn't raucous fury or political clarity or the voice of history speaking through her. It was simple arithmetic. If she let it go, nothing changed. In 6 days, Derek would drive home through the dark, and the next person Dever stopped wouldn't have her training either. And the person after that, and the 4 people before her had not let it go by choice. They had let it go because they were offered $800 or $2,000 and had needed the money and signed a piece of paper that said they would be quiet and it was over. They hadn't had a choice. She had one. She had the rank. She had the documentation. She had the resources. She had the legal contacts and the organizational backing and the 22 years of impeccable service record that would make her testimony credible in a room of people who would otherwise find it easier not to believe her. She had everything those 4 people hadn't had, and she was sitting at her kitchen table at 1 in the morning, deciding whether to use it. She opened the laptop, navigated to the Office of Inspector General complaint portal, and started typing, not fast, not from emotion. Deliberately, the way she did everything that mattered. Date of incident, she typed it. Time, she typed it. Location, Federal Route 50, eastbound, approximately 3 miles east of the County Road 15 intersection. Officer identification, Sergeant C. Dever, badge 4471, Pueblo Police Department. She typed for 50 minutes. She described every moment of the stop in the precise, sequential, unembellished language of someone who had written incident reports for 22 years and understood that the power of a report is not in how it makes you feel, but in what it records. She noted the absence of any legitimate reason for the stop. She noted the demand to exit the vehicle without stated cause. She noted that she had requested legal basis and not received it. She noted the field sobriety test that she had passed completely. She noted the citation issued regardless. She noted the 2 seconds. When she finished, she read it once, corrected a minor phrasing issue in the 3rd paragraph, read it again. Then she opened a second window. Mocha 4. The subject line was 4 words, I need your help. The body of the email was the paragraphs, the incident, the documentation she had, what she wanted to happen. She sent it at 1:47 a.m., closed the laptop, sat in the quiet for a moment. The lamp under Derek's door was still on. She looked at it. Then she got up and walked down the hall and stood in the doorway of his room without turning on the overhead light. Just stood there for a moment in the light from the lamp on his desk, his books on the shelf in the order he'd organized them, which was not quite alphabetical and not quite by subject, but was some logic she'd never fully decoded. His desk with the chair pushed in too far. The framed photo on the dresser. The 2 of them at his high school graduation. Her in civvies, him in the black gown, both of them squinting into the sun and smiling. She stood there for about 30 seconds. Then she turned off the lamp, walked to her own room, and for the first time in several hours, she stopped thinking about what came next. At 6:52 the following morning, her phone showed a new email. From Vivian Okafor. Renata, I need the footage. I need to see the pop beep by noon today. Renata read it over her coffee. Type back, yes, Vivian, bring original file, pot. Don't post anything online before we talk. Renata, I know. Hi, VN. I know you know. Saying it anyway. She set the phone down, finished her coffee, got dressed. At 7:55, she was at her desk on the base, in uniform, inbox open. The procurement delay out of Denver still unresolved on day 17. A personnel matter that needed attention before the Thursday briefing. A facilities review that needed scheduling. Her aide, Staff Sergeant Brewster, appeared in the doorway at 8:09 with the expression of a young man, trying to read a face that wasn't offering him much to read. Ma'am, you good? She looked up. Always. He hesitated in the particular way of someone who'd been trained well enough to know when to push and smart enough to know when not to. Got a message from Colonel Whitfield's office about the Pueblo meeting notes. I'll have them by 11, and your noon block is clear. Keep it clean on it. Left. Turned back to her screen. For the next 3 hours, she wrote the Pueblo meeting notes, drafted 2 logistics reports, responded to 11 emails, scheduled the facilities review for Thursday at 9, called the Denver procurement office, and had a conversation that was polite in tone and entirely unambiguous in content. the result of which was that the delay would be resolved by end of week. She did not mention the previous night to anyone, not because she was protecting herself, because the time for people to know was not yet. And she had learned in 22 years that affected lives as the difference between acting and reacting. Reacting was loud and immediate and felt like control. Acting was deliberate and timed and actually was. Vivienne Okafor's office was on the third floor of a downtown building that smelled like old paper and good coffee and the specific dry efficiency of a woman who had been practicing civil rights law for 14 years and had organized her workspace accordingly. She was already watching the footage when Renata arrived. Glasses on, a yellow legal pad on the desk, pen. Everything else cleared. She didn't look up immediately. Renata sat across from her, set her folder on the edge that edited. Vivienne watched the stop all the way through, then went back. Watched the moment of the document exchange again. Watched it a third time, this time with the pad in her hand, writing. Then she took her glasses off, put them on the desk, looked at Renata. He saw the federal ID. Yes, I can see in the footage. The pause. Yes, Vivienne tapped one finger on the legal pad, once, thinking, you know this is going to take time. I know. The department will push back, I know. It might get public before it gets resolved. Good, Renata said, a beat. Vivienne almost smiled. Not quite. What do you want from this? She asked, the question she asked every client, not challenging, just clarifying. She'd learned early that what people said they wanted and what they actually wanted were often two different things, and that the gap between them could destroy a case. Renata looked at her. I want it on record, all of it. The stop, the citation, his prior history with complaints. I want it documented somewhere. It cannot be buried again. And the 4 people before you, they deserve to have this opened. Vivienne looked at her for a moment, the look of someone who has heard many people say similar things and has learned to distinguish between the ones who mean it and the ones who think they mean it. She picked up her glasses, put them back on. Then here's where we start, she said, and turned to a fresh page on the legal pad. There is a thing that happens in the 24 hours after a complaint is filed by someone who knows exactly how to file one. It's not dramatic. It doesn't look like anything from the outside. Looks like paperwork. But paperwork, in the right hands, filed with the right language, sent to the right offices. Paperwork is not nothing. Paperwork is how the abstract becomes real. How a thing that happened on a dark road at 11:30 at night becomes a thing that exists in a system and cannot be made to unexist. Anata's complaint went to the Inspector General's office at 9:17 a.m. Thursday. Vivienne's document preservation notice, requiring the Pueblo Police Department to retain all footage, all communications, and all records related to the stop, pending civil litigation, went out at 8:45 a.m., 11 minutes before the complaint itself. Because Vivienne understood the order of operations in a way that mattered. By 9 a.m., a woman named Patterson at the Inspector General's office had received the complaint, had pulled Deaver's name against existing records, had found 4 prior complaints, had noted the dates, the demographics of the complainants, the late-night timing, the specific stretch of road, had opened a new file. Cormac Deaver found out at 10 a.m. Friday morning. Marsh called him in, 3rd time in his career. First 2 had been years apart and minor. This one was different, and Marsh's face when Dever walked in told him so before the door had finished closing. Marsh put the document preservation notice on the desk. Dever read it, laughed. The laugh of a man who had been in this department for 16 years and believed, somewhere deep and unexamined, that he was protected from things like this. It's a traffic citation complaint. It's 3 separate filings. Marsh, Inspector General, Federal Civil Rights Division, and a civil litigation hold from her attorney. The laugh stopped. Federal civil rights. The vehicle was a government issue. Active duty. Official travel. That triggers federal protections your incident report didn't account for. Marsh's voice was even, not angry, careful. The voice of a man managing something he had not prepared for. Their attorney sent the hold notice the morning after the stop, 11 hours after the citation was issued. Deaver sat back. She moved fast, Marsh said. This isn't someone who's going to get tired and go away. Deaver was quiet. You need to call the union rep today. Before you talk to anyone else. Before you say anything to anyone in this building about what happened on that stop. I followed procedure. Marsh looked at him. That specific look of a supervisor who knows more than he's saying and is deciding how much of it to say right now. Call Bowman, he said. Today. Bowman arrived at 1:58. They sat in a conference room for 2 hours. Bowman asked his questions. Deaver answered them. When they got to the federal identification card, Bowman asked, "Did you have time to read it?" Pause that followed lasted 1 beat longer than it should have. I glanced at it. Bowman's pen stopped. "Did you read the name on the card?" It was late. I was processing multiple documents. Bowman looked at him over the notepad. Cormac, Flat, Professional. Their attorney has filed for body camera footage in Discovery, all of it, including any footage from after the stop concluded. Deaver didn't say anything. Is there anything on that footage that I should know about before I see it from the other side of a courtroom? A longer pause this time. I don't know exactly what the camera picked up, which was technically true. He didn't know exactly. He knew approximately. He had a feeling low and specific and sitting in his chest since Thursday of approximately what it had picked up. But he didn't know exactly. Not knowing exactly was the only small ledge he was standing on right now, and he was not ready to step off it. "I'll request a private viewing of the complete footage," Bowman said. "Before Discovery, we need to see what we're dealing with." Deaver nodded, looked at the table, said nothing else. That evening, Renata made dinner. Pasta, olive oil, whatever herbs were still good in the cabinet. The same 6 dishes she'd been rotating for years because she'd decided them once and didn't need to keep deciding. She ate at the kitchen table, called Derek at 7:30. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, Mom. Hey, how was us? Long." Professor Hargrove assigned a 12-pager due in 2 weeks. He exhaled in the particular way of someone performing suffering that wasn't quite as bad as they were performing it. But it's actually kind of interesting. It's about post-war economic restructuring, like how countries rebuild systems after they collapse. She thought, systems that... "How's your day?" he asked. She looked at the table, at the spot where the citation had been smoothed flat 2 nights ago, filed away now. "Evidence." "Productive," she said. "You sure?" "I'm good, Derek." "Okay." A pause. "Drive safe when you come home next time, right?" She almost smiled. "That's my line, I know. I'm giving it back." Another pause. "I'm almost the jerk chicken phase, by the way. I think I've had it 6 Thursdays in a row. Is that a problem? It might be becoming a personality trait." She laughed. Small, real. The laugh she only had with him. He talked for 12 more minutes, the paper, the dining hall. A minor question that was still unresolved. He said he'd been leaning toward political science. She said the decision was his. He said he knew. She said good. Then he said love you, and she said it back, and the line went quiet. She sat with the quiet for a moment. Not the sad kind, not the anxious kind. The kind that comes from knowing you've set something in motion that is right. Not easy, not fast, not guaranteed to be comfortable. Right. And sometimes right is the only foundation that holds. In 6 days, Derek would drive home. 400 miles, alone, at night. And Renata would be ready for whatever came before then, whatever came during, whatever came after. Because he had always been the kind of person who prepared her, who documented, who showed up exactly as tall as she was and said exactly what was true and let it stand. This was no different, except that it was. Because this time what she was standing for wasn't just hers. The lamp under Derek's door, still on. She looked at it from the kitchen table, left it on, and went to bed. The envelope arrived on a Friday morning, plain white. His name typed on the front in the font that official correspondence uses when it wants to sound neutral but isn't. No return address that meant anything to him at first glance. The kind of envelope you open without ceremony, because it looks like every other piece of department mail that has ever landed on your desk. Deaver picked up from the front desk without looking at it, tucked it under his arm, walked to his locker, set it on the shelf next to his spare radio battery and a protein bar he'd been ignoring for 11 days. Finished his coffee first. Because that's what you do when you're a man who has spent 16 years believing that nothing can genuinely touch you. You finish your coffee, you take your time. You don't let a plain white envelope make you move faster than you've decided to move. He opened it standing up, read it once. Then again, the protein bar was somehow on the floor. He didn't remember it falling. Didn't pick it up. Notice of formal civil complaint. Plaintiff Lieutenant Colonel Renata O.C. Defendant Sergeant Cormac Deaver, Pueblo, Police Department. Charge 1, violation of constitutional rights during an unlawful traffic stop and detention of a federal employee. Charge 2, targeted enforcement based on race. Charge 3, abuse of authority in the absence of documented probable cause. Court date. Pending scheduling before the El Paso County Civil Court. He stood there for a moment that stretched longer than moments usually do. Then he laughed. Not a real laugh. The kind that escapes when the body doesn't know what else to do with the information it just received. When something is so far outside the expected range of outcomes that the system producing responses hasn't caught up yet. He folded the notice, put it in his jacket pocket, walked to the break room, poured more coffee he didn't need from a pot that had been sitting since 7. Garrett was at the table with a sandwich and a tablet, reading something. He looked up. What happened to you? Nothing. You look like someone told you your house burned down. I said nothing, Garrett. Garrett looked at him for 3 full seconds over the top of the tablet. The look of a man who has worked alongside someone for long enough to know when nothing means something. He didn't push it, which was how Dever knew, even before the meeting with Marsh, even before Bowman arrived, that Garrett already knew something, because Garrett always pushed it. Garrett had been pushing things since 2014. The fact that he didn't push this one meant he understood the shape of it well enough to still leash. Marsh's office. 3rd times. Door closed, blinds pulled this time. That was new. Marsh was standing by the window when Dever walked in, arms crossed, not angry, contained. The posture of a man holding something with both hands because putting it down wasn't an option. Sit down, Cormac. Dever sat. Marsh moved to the desk but didn't sit behind it, stood at the side of it, close enough to talk quietly. The configuration of a conversation that was not for the record. He slid a paper across the desk. Aver looked at it. I already got the complaint notice. That's not the complaint notice. He looked again. It was a list. 3 columns, 3 agencies, 3 separate reference numbers, 3 filing dates, all within 48 hours of the stop on Federal Route 50. Office of Inspector General, Federal Civil Rights Division, Department of Justice, El Paso County Civil Court, Civil Litigation Hold, filed by the law offices of Vivian Okafor. 3. Not 1 complaint. 3. Filed to 3 different bodies simultaneously. Dever's coffee cup made a small sound when he set it down. Too hard. Not intentionally, she filed with the federal. The vehicle she was driving was government-issued, active-duty military, official travel at the time of the stop. Marsh's voice was level, the level of a man who had rehearsed what he was going to say and was saying it exactly as rehearsed. That classification triggers federal jurisdiction protections that your incident report did not address. Our legal team received notification yesterday morning. They're already involved at the departmental level. Dever opened his mouth, closed it. Tried again. I had no way of knowing that the vehicle. You had her federal identification card in your hand, Cormac. The room did what rooms do in moments like that. Went very still. Not hostile. Not accusatory. Just still. The stillness of fact occupying the exact space between 2 people who both know it's there. I followed procedure, Dever said, quieter than before. Marsh looked at him with something that might have been sympathy, or might have been the exhaustion of a man who had been managing the consequences of other people's decisions for 24 years, and had run low on the energy required to feel bad about it. The union rep is coming at 2, he said. Do not talk to anyone before then. Not Garrett, not your cousin in traffic, not anyone in this building about the specifics of what happened that night. What about the body camera footage? Preserved. Both cameras. Their attorney sent a document hold notice 11 hours after the stop. He let that land. Let it sit there. She moved fast, Cormac. This is not someone who is going to get frustrated and go away. Dever was quiet. The kind of quiet that isn't peaceful. The kind that has things moving fast underneath it. What am I looking at? Marsh finally sat. Not behind the desk. On the edge of it. The posture of a man setting down some of the formality. Because what came next required a different kind of conversation. At minimum, a civil judgment. Damn its images. Public record. He paused. At maximum, and this depends significantly on what the footage shows, a pattern of behavior finding that opens up the prior complaints. The word prior hung in the air. Dever said nothing. 4 complaints in 3 years, Cormac. Still quiet. Still level. All resolved internally. All closed. But resolved and closed are not the same as gone. If their attorney requests those files in discovery, she can do that. Marsh looked at him, and in that look was the answer, and the answer was yes. And the answer also contained, you should have understood this was possible. You should have understood that closed does not mean protected. You should have understood that 16 years of the department looking away was not the same as 16 years of the department being right. Call Bowman, Marsh said. 2 o'clock. Bowman arrived at 1:58, thick neck, practiced calm, the specific stillness of a man who had spent 20 years walking into rooms where things had gone wrong and had trained his face to register nothing until he decided what to register. They sat in conference room B for 2 hours and 17 minutes. Bowman asked questions. Deaver answered them. They went through the stop chronologically, minute by minute, the way you build a wall, one brick at a time, checking each one for cracks before adding the next. The reason for the stop, lane drift, observed before the camera angle had captured it. The document exchange, multiple documents, reviewed. The field sobriety evaluation, discretionary call based on observed indicators. The citation, issued based on the documented lane violation. Bowman wrote everything down, asked clarifying questions in the flat, purposeless way of someone who was not judging the answers but was mapping them for structural integrity. Then he got to the federal identification. Did you have time to fully read it? A pause. One beat too long. I reviewed the documents. Bowman's pen stopped moving. He looked up slowly. Did you read the name on the federal ID? It was late. I was processing multiple items at once. Bowman set the pen down. Cormac. The first time he'd used the first name. I changed the register of the room. Their attorney has filed for the complete body camera footage in Discovery, not just the stop itself. Everything recorded from the moment your lights came on until you returned to the cruiser and drove away. Deaver looked at the table. Everything. Silence. Is there anything on that footage that I should be aware of before I encounter it on the other side of a courtroom? A longer pause this time. A pause with weight in it. I don't know exactly what the camera picked up. Bowman looked at him for a moment. The look of a man who was parsing what had just been said very carefully. The difference between I don't know and I don't know exactly was not lost on him. I picked the pen back up. I'm going to arrange a private viewing of the complete unedited footage, he said. You and me, before Discovery. We need to know what we're working with. Dever nodded, said nothing else. They scheduled the viewing for the following Monday, which meant 5 days. 5 days of Dever going to work, running his calls, writing his reports, sitting in the break room with his coffee and responding to Garrett's conversation with the minimum required engagement. Going home to an apartment that was too quiet and a specific way of a space that used to have other people in it. 5 days of carrying the low, specific weight of not knowing exactly what the footage showed. He slept badly. He would not have said this to anyone. He was not the kind of man who offered information about his sleep to other people. But the truth was that he woke at 3 and then again at 4, and then gave up entirely at 5:15, and sat in the kitchen in the dark with coffee that he started making before he was fully awake. And he ran through the stop, in the kitchen dark. Every morning that week, he'd pulled her over because, why? Because the shift was slow, because his gut said so. Because 16 years of instincts told him that car on that road at that hour was worth a look. But here was the thing about instincts that nobody ever tells you. Instincts are trained responses. They are the accumulated weight of every experience you've had, and every assumption you've absorbed, and every piece of feedback you've received or failed to receive. Instincts are not neutral. They are not objective. They are not automatically right, simply because they feel automatic. He knew this. He had known it at 28, in a different way, in the way of someone who was still building their understanding of the job. He had forgotten it sometime in the years between then and now. In the kitchen dark at 15 a.m., he was starting to remember it. Not all the way, not yet. But the edge of it was there. The beginning of a question he had not been willing to ask himself in 16 years. He didn't finish the question. Not yet. He made more coffee instead. Meanwhile, in an office on the base 26 miles, Renata Osei was working, not preparing for the case, working her actual job, the supply chain operation that connected 4 facilities across 2 states. The procurement delay out of Denver that had reached day 18 and was creating downstream effects that were becoming impossible to manage around. She got the Denver issue resolved on Thursday. 3 calls, 2 emails, 1 direct conversation with a contractor who had apparently been under the impression that stalling was a viable long-term strategy. Renata had explained, in the specific, precise way she explained things when she wanted no ambiguity. about the consequence of not understanding her, what the alternative to resolution looked like. The delay was gone by 4 p.m. Brewster appeared in her doorway when she told him. The Denver thing done. He blinked. How? I asked them to do their job and explained what would happen if they didn't. He looked at her for a moment with the expression of someone making a mental note to never be on the wrong side of that particular conversation. Then he nodded and left. Renata turned back to her screen. There was always another thing. That was the nature of the work. One problem resolved became the space in which you could finally see the next problem clearly. She didn't resent this. She had made her peace with it a long time ago. The work was never finished. The work was the point. Vivian called Wednesday afternoon. They've responded to the hold notice. And compliance. All footage preserved. Department counsel confirmed this morning. A pause. They're not going to play games with the documentation piece. Whatever they're planning to fight, it's not that. Because they can't. Because they can't, Vivian agreed. Their union rep is Bowman, Gerald Bowman. He's been doing this for 20 years. He's competent. He'll build a procedure defense. Deaver was operating within discretionary guidelines. The stop was within policy parameters. The evaluation was a judgment call. Which falls apart if he knew who I was. Which falls apart completely if he knew who you were. A shorter pause. I want the complete body camera footage, not just the stop. Everything from light activation to return to cruiser. Renata said, You think there's something after I drove away? I think a man who had your federal identification in his hand for 2 to 3 seconds made a specific decision. And I think that sometimes when people make specific decisions, they do things in the moments afterward that they don't realize anyone will care about. File for it. Already drafted. Goes out in the morning. The subpoena for the unedited body camera footage was filed Thursday at 9:07 a.m. By 11, Bowman had called Marsh. By 2 p.m., the department's legal counsel had called Vivian's office. By Friday morning, the footage file had been produced. Vivian received it at 8:40 a.m. She closed her office door, set her phone to go to voicemail, put her glasses on, opened the file on her laptop, and placed a fresh legal pad to the right of the keyboard. She watched the complete footage from the moment Deaver's emergency lights activated. She watched the approach to the vehicle, the document exchange, the conversation, the field sobriety evaluation in its entirety, the citation being written, the return to the cruiser. She watched all of it, then she went back, watched the document exchange again. Specifically the 2 to 3 second pause when Deaver's eyes were on the federal identification card. Watched it 4 times, wrote on the pad, then she went to the end. After Renata had driven away, watched Dever walking back toward his cruiser, watched him reach the driver's side window ledge where he'd staged the documents, watched him pick up the stack and begin sorting. She watched him separate the federal identification from the other documents, watched him read it, watched his head tilt, watched him nod once, watched him set it down, watched him reach for his citation book. She counted 11 seconds. She put her pen down, took her glasses off, sat back, and looked at the frozen frame on her laptop screen, Deaver's hands, the federal identification card, the citation book, for approximately 30 seconds without moving. Then she picked up the phone. Renata? Yes. Can you come in tomorrow morning? 9 o'clock. Yes. What did you find? A pause. Not for effect. Vivienne never did things for effect. I'll show you when you get here. Bring nothing. I have everything we need. Renata arrived at 8:58. Vivienne had the footage pulled up on the laptop, paused at the timestamp she wanted. No preamble. Watch this. She played 11 seconds. The office was quiet in the specific way of a space where something important is happening, and the people in it understand it without announcing it. The footage ended. Renata looked at the frozen frame, said nothing for a moment. Then he knew. Yes, after I left. He picked it up again and confirmed, yes, that's not a mistake. That's not missing information. That's a choice made with full information. Yes. Vivian's voice was even. On legal terms, this moves the stop from possible negligence, which is defensible, to demonstrated intentional targeting, which is a different category entirely. He saw your federal identification. He confirmed your identity after you left. He issued the citation with that knowledge. She paused once. That's not a procedural error. That's a civil rights violation with documentation. Renata looked at her. How does this change what we can ask for? It changes what we can prove, which changes everything. Vivian leaned forward slightly. I want to be clear with you. This is a strong case. But it will be a public case. Their attorney will respond to this footage by trying to contextualize it, by arguing that reviewing documents is standard practice, by making 11 seconds look like nothing. We will need you in that courtroom explaining exactly what those 11 seconds mean. I know. And the settlement offer they sent last week, the confidentiality clause. Yes. Renata looked at the laptop screen. The frozen frame, Deaver's hands. If I sign that, she said slowly, the 4 prior complaints stay buried. Correct. People who filed those complaints. Some of them signed confidentiality agreements because they needed the money, or because they were afraid, or because nobody told them they had the right to say no. That's likely. They didn't have what I have. No, they didn't. Renata sat with that for a moment, the full weight of it. The specific, heavy privilege of being in a position to refuse something that other people hadn't been able to refuse. The responsibility that came with that. A clear, uncomfortable fact of what it meant to sign the confidentiality agreement versus what it meant to not sign it. Draft the rejection, she said. I started it yesterday, said Vivian. The rejection went out Wednesday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, the court date had been scheduled, 5 weeks out. Monday, 9 a.m., El Paso County Civil Court. The department's response arrived in the form of Bowman calling Marsh, who called a meeting, who called Deaver in for the 4th time. Marsh was behind his desk this time, fully behind it, the formal configuration. They rejected the settlement. Deaver nodded slowly. This is going to court. Another nod. Bowman needs to know if there is anything at all on that body camera footage that is going to be worse in a courtroom than in a private conversation right now. Dever looked at the desk, at the surface of it, the scratches in the wood from years of files and equipment, and the daily weight of a job that accumulated in physical ways. The footage shows me reviewing documents, he said, all of the footage, including after she drove away. A pause that cost him something. I reviewed the documentation as part of standard close-out procedure. Marsh looked at him, long enough that the look became its own kind of answer. Bowman needs to review the complete footage, he said, today if possible. Bowman saw the footage at 4 p.m. that same day. He watched the 11 seconds 4 times. Then he sat back and looked at Deaver across the conference table, with the expression of a man who has just seen the inside of the case. He's been asked to defend, and has updated his assessment accordingly. Tell me what I'm looking at, he said. Standard document review. Bowman let a silence develop. Cormac, measured, patient. The patience of a man who needed accurate information more than he needed comfortable information. What does a jury see when they watch you pick up that federal identification card, after she's gone and read it and nod, and then reach for your citation book? Dever looked at the table. They see a man confirming what he already knew, and then issuing the same citation anyways. Yes. And that's... Dever stopped. That's the case, Bowman said. Not kindly. Just clearly. That is their entire case in 11 seconds. Everything else they present is context and texture. The 11 seconds is the case. Oliver was quiet. Bowman placed both hands flat on the table. I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer it honestly, because the answer changes our entire strategy. Oliver looked up. Did you issue that citation because you believed she had violated traffic law? A very long silence. Longer than the question required, if the answer was yes. I issued it, Deaver said, because I started the stop and I wasn't going to not finish it. Bowman absorbed that, wrote nothing, looked at Devore for a moment. Then he picked up his pen. Here's what we're going to argue, he said, and he began building the defense that he knew as he built it was not going to be enough. 2 weeks before the court date, Vivian found the 5th complaint. She had been thorough. She was always thorough. Thorough was not a strategy for Vivian. It was a disposition. The way some people are naturally cautious or naturally generous. She was naturally thorough in the way that meant she kept looking after other people had stopped. The department had been required to produce Dever's personnel history under discovery. The file that arrived was organized in the standard departmental format. Complaint section, 4 files, dates, outcomes, disposition codes. All 4 marked closed internal resolution. Vivian read all 4, made notes, noted the pattern of complainants, noted the timing, noted the financial settlements, ranging from $2,000 to $8,000, attached to confidentiality agreements in each case. Then she ran the standard secondary records request, because she always ran the secondary records request. Because in 14 years of social rights law, she had learned that what a department produces willingly is never the complete picture. There is always a second layer, sometimes a third. The question is whether you know to look for it and how to ask for it in language precise enough that they cannot technically comply while actually withholding. The secondary request came back with one additional file, archived under a case number that connected to Deaver's badge number only through a cross-reference system that required knowing both fields existed simultaneously. Not hidden, technically, lent, but stored in a way that assumed nobody would look. The file was labeled Peterson, C. Traffic Incident Review, closed, 14 months ago. Harold Peterson, 43 years old, stopped on Federal Route 50 at 11:40 p.m. on a Tuesday. Black, alleged aggressive escalation without documented cause. Field sobriety, test administered, passed. Citation issued. Settlement, $8,000. Confidentiality agreement signed 39 days after the complaint was filed. File marked closed. Archived. Gone. Except it wasn't gone, it was here, in Vivienne's hands, because she had asked precisely the right question in precisely the right way. 5 complaints. Not 4. 5 people on the same road at night in the same years with the same officer. And a department that had been protecting itself by protecting him. Vivienne called Renata at 7:04 p.m. There's a 5th, a silence on the line. Then, how? Secondary records request. It was archived separately. They may have assumed I wouldn't find it, or may have believed they were technically lying without fully disclosing. Either way, I have it. Who? Carol, Peter Unst. Same road, same hour. She settled for $8,000 and signed confidentiality. Renata was quiet for a moment. $8,000 and silence. A woman who had been on that road at night, alone, and had been stopped and tested and cited, and then offered money to not talk about it, and who had taken the money. Not because she was wrong to. Because $8,000 is $8,000, and a legal fight is a legal fight, and not everyone has a Vivienne Okafor, and 22 years of service and documentation, and the institutional backing to say no. Carol Peterson had taken what she could get, and then she had been quiet, and her file had been archived in a way that assumed nobody would look. Can we use it? Renata asked. It goes to pattern of behavior, directly. Yes, Vivienne paused. It also goes to the department's conduct, not just Devers. The fact that this file was separately archived, that 5 complaints were never connected and reviewed collectively, that's its own issue. Add it. I already started the amendment. 3 days before the hearing, Deaver watched the 11-second clip for the first time. He'd been avoiding it, not with a plan, not consciously, just not watching it. Knowing it existed. Knowing it was in a file on Bowman's laptop. Knowing it would eventually be on a screen in a courtroom. And choosing each day to know all of that from a certain distance rather than look at it directly. But Bowman sent it to his phone that morning with a message. Watch it tonight. Be familiar with what the jury will see. He watched it in his car, in the precinct parking lot. 7:45 a.m., engine off. He watched himself pick up the federal identification card. Read it. Hold it. Nod once. Put it down. Reach for the citation book. He watched it 3 times. And then he sat in the parking lot while the morning arrived around him. Other officers coming in, doors slamming, the ordinary sounds of a building beginning its day. He watched himself one more time. The thing that moved through him then was not what he would have predicted. Not defiance. Not the old familiar certainty that had carried him through 16 years. Not the practiced conviction that he'd done what he'd been trained to do and had nothing to answer for. Something else. Something quieter and harder to name and considerably more uncomfortable. Recognition. The specific, private, unwelcome sensation of looking at something you've done and seeing it clearly for the first time. Not from inside the moment, where it had seemed like nothing. Like routine, like standard practice, like 16 years of instincts operating as they always had. But from outside. From the angle of 11 seconds on a small screen in a parking lot at 7:45 in the morning. From the angle of a jury who would watch those 11 seconds and see exactly what they were. I had looked at her identification. He had seen her name and her rank and her federal status. I had nodded, and he had written the citation anyway. Not could violated traffic law. He knew that now in a way he had been successfully not knowing for 5 weeks. She hadn't been drifting. He had seen a car and made a decision before he had a reason. And then he had found a reason. And then she had passed every test he administered, and he had written the citation because he had started the stop, and he was not going to not finish it. That was the truth. He had not let himself know the truth until this parking lot, this morning. These 11 seconds, he put his phone in his pocket, sat for 2 more minutes, then he got out of the car and went to work. 1 week before the hearing, Derek called on a Sunday, 7:30 p.m. Second ring, same as always. Hey, Mom. Hey, how's the paper? Done it. Turned it in Friday. The specific satisfaction in his voice of someone who has completed something they were mildly dreading and found it wasn't as bad as anticipated. Got some interesting stuff about how economic reconstruction after conflict depends mostly on whether the institutions that failed are rebuilt differently or just rebuilt the same. Renata considered that for a moment. Institutions rebuilt the same way, she said. Right. Like you can't just put the same structure back and expect different outcomes. The structure was part of the problem. Smart professor, I told you. Secretly a genius. A pause. Mom? Yeah, the hearing's next week. She was quiet for a moment, deciding. I know you know, she said. I was going to tell you this week. I've known for 2 weeks. Someone from your base posted something and I did some reading. Another pause. This one carrying things he was working out how to say. Why didn't you tell me? Because it wasn't yours to carry. Mom. The gentle pushback of someone who loves you enough to disagree with you carefully. It kind of is mine. She closed her eyes. He was right. Not in the way that would change her decision. She would carry this. She was the one with the rank and the documentation and the attorney and the years of preparation for exactly this kind of moment. She was the one who had been on that road. She was the one who had been tested and cited and had made the decisions in the kitchen dark at 1 a.m. She was carrying this. But he was right that it was also his. In the way that a mother's decision to fight for accountability on a dark highway belongs to the child who will drive that highway, who will have his own encounters with blue and red lights in the years ahead, who deserves to live in a world that is even slightly different because someone with the ability to change it decided to. I know, she said. I should have told you. A breath from his end. The breath of someone accepting an apology that was real. Are you scared? He asked. No. Are you? Gentle, firm. Both together. I am very good at being in rooms where things matter. A pause. I know you are, he said. And the way he said it. Not as comfort, not as reassurance, but as simple fact delivered by someone who had watched her his whole life and had concluded this was the closest thing to armor she had ever been given. I know, she said again. A beat. Call me after? First call. Okay. Another beat. Love, Mom, love you. The line went quiet. She sat with it for a moment. Then she got up and went to lay out her uniform for the week. The night before the hearing, Denver's son texted at 8:47 p.m. Ryan. 17. Text that had been getting shorter for a year and a half. 1 line, sometimes 2. Doing okay. How are you? Short things that maintain the minimum structure of connection without requiring either of them to address the distance that had grown between them. This text was different. Dad, I saw the news coverage. Is what they're saying true? Ivor read it at the kitchen table with the television off and his badge on the counter where he'd left it earlier. He looked at the badge, then at the text. The news coverage had been local. Small, a brief item about the upcoming hearing that used the phrase pattern of behavior in his name and his badge number, not front page. Not the kind of thing that would come up unless you were looking for it. Ryan had been looking for it, which meant Ryan had heard something first. From someone who knew, or someone who had seen the original filing. Kids talked. Parents talked to other parents. It got around. Ryan knew, and had been sitting on it for however long, and had finally texted. Is what they're saying true? Dever typed and deleted 3 front responses. Then he typed, we can talk tomorrow. After what time? Dever, I don't know. I'll call you. 3 dots appeared. Stopped. Appeared again. Stopped. Then okay. Just okay. Which was exactly as much had given his son in the past 18 months. The minimum structure of connection. Maintained, not collapsed. But thin enough that light came through. He put the phone down, looked at the badge again, picked it up. He'd wanted one of these since he was 11 years old. Standing in a 5th grade classroom listening to Officer Marcus Webb describe a job that meant something, that protected people. That was about being present for the moments when ordinary life came apart. And someone needed a person who knew what to do. He had believed that. He had worked for it. had been proud of it in a way he'd never found the words for because it was too deep for easy language, had carried it through 16 years of early mornings and late nights and difficult calls and the particular specific exhaustion of a job that gives you just enough to keep going and rarely more. And somewhere between that fifth-grade classroom and this kitchen table at 10 p.m. the night before a civic light hearing, the gap between what he'd believed the badge meant and what the 11-second clip showed him doing had become impossible to ignore. He set it back on the counter, went to bed, didn't sleep. At 5 a.m., he got up, made coffee, sat in the kitchen dark, and this time he let himself finish the question he'd been stopping short of for 5 weeks. Had he pulled her over because of something she had done? No. Had he asked her to exit the vehicle because she presented a genuine safety concern? No. Had he administered the field sobriety test because she showed any indicator that warranted it? No. Had he issued the citation because she had violated traffic law? No. He had pulled her over because of something wordless and unexamined and 16 years deep that had been operating without accountability for so long it had started to feel like instinct instead of what it actually was. He had escalated because she had asked a question, and the question had felt like a challenge, and challenges needed to be handled. He had written the citation because he had started something, and he was going to finish it regardless of what the evidence said. And he had done all of this after reading her name on a federal identification card. After knowing who she was, he sat with that in the kitchen at 5 a.m., with the dark and the coffee and the badge on the counter, and his son's okay sitting in his phone. There was no dramatic moment, no collapse, no conversion experience, just a man sitting with the truth of what he'd done and understanding, for the first time without any of the machinery of defense and procedure and institutional protection running in the background, that it was wrong, not technically wrong, not procedurally arguable, wrong. He drank his coffee, got dressed, drove to the courthouse. Renata was already in the parking lot when he arrived. He didn't see her. She was across the structure in a different section. Walking toward the entrance in her full dress uniform, the morning light catching the ribbons on her left chest, her stride the same as it always was. Even, deliberate, the stride of someone who knew exactly where they were going and had no need to hurry. He was in a dark suit. They entered through different doors, and in 45 minutes, a judge would call a courtroom to order. And everything that had been building since a Tuesday night on Federal Route 50, since a hand pausing on a federal identification card, since a woman sitting at a kitchen table in the dark deciding not to be quiet. All of it would come into the light. The courtroom was smaller than people expect. That's always the thing. You imagine courtrooms a certain way, from television, from movies, from the idea of justice being large enough to contain what it's deciding. Cathedral ceilings, dramatic light. A gallery of hundreds leaning forward. Real courtrooms have fluorescent lights, and carpet that hasn't been replaced since the previous decade, and wooden benches worn smooth by years of people sitting in them waiting for things to be decided, and a clock on the wall that runs 3 minutes fast, which nobody has fixed, which somehow feels appropriate. The jury of 12 was already seated when Renata walked in. 8 women, 4 men, a cross-section of El Paso, assembled to hear a thing and decide what it meant. She didn't study their faces yet. There would be time for that. Right now, she walked to the plaintiff's table, set her folder down precisely, and sat. Across the room at the defense table, Cormac Deaver was already there. Dark suit, hands flat on the table. The posture of a man who had decided sometime between 5 a.m. and now to be very still. She didn't look at him directly, but she saw him, the way she saw everything in peripheral, the full picture, registered and catalogued without making it the center of her attention. He looked like a man carrying something heavy. Good. He should. Judge Sandra Pruitt entered at 9:02. Silver hair. Reading glasses on a chain. The walk on someone who had been in this room for 19 years and owned it completely without needing to announce that she owned it. She sat, arranged her papers, looked at the room over the glasses. We're here in the matter of O.C. versus Dever. Flat. Factual. Counsels, you may proceed. Vivian's opening took 7 minutes. No performance, no dramatic pauses, no raising of the voice, just the sequence. A traffic stop on Federal Route 50. 11:20 p.m. on a Wednesday. A federal employee in a government vehicle. No documented cause, no indicators of impairment. Documents are provided. Field sobriety evaluation passed completely. citation issued regardless, and then footage from the officer's own body camera. Footage lasting, in its most critical moment, 11 seconds. She said the number once. 11 seconds. Then she sat down. Bowman's opening ran 11 minutes. Careful, thorough. Officer discretion. Legal standards. Procedural documentation. He used the word professional 4 times, the word procedure 3 times. He didn't mention the 11 seconds. Renata was called to the stand at 10:15. She walked to the witness box the way she walked into every room that required her to account for herself, like she belonged there. Not arrogance, not performance. 22 years of earning the right to stand exactly as tall as she was. She spoke the way she wrote incident reports. Date, time, location, sequence. I was returning to the Italy points from a work meeting within the speed in my lane, not impaired. The officer approached without greeting, flashlight directly into my face. A demand for documents, not a request. I provided everything, including my federal identification. I watched him receive it. He asked if I had been drinking. No. He asked me to exit the vehicle. I asked for the legal basis. He repeated the demand louder. I turned on my phone to record. I passed every element of the field sobriety evaluation. Without error, I was cited regardless. 9 minutes. No embellishment. No reaching in for sympathy. Just the truth, standing on its own cross-examination. Bowman approached with the measured pace of a man using preparation to keep himself calm. The stop became somewhat tense when you asked for the basis. I asked a legal question. He escalated. Those are different things. You turned on your phone to record. She looked at him, not with hostility, with something considerably more powerful than hostility. Because I have spent 22 years understanding that memory is contested and documentation is not. And because the last time someone who looked like me relied on good faith during an interaction like this, without documentation, it didn't end the way it should have. The room shifted, the cellular kind, the kind that happens when something true lands, simultaneously and nobody needs to say so. Bowman moved on. You were fully cooperative, completely. You didn't raise your voice. No, but you finished the stop. I asked for the legal basis. Yes. Could that questioning have created friction? Asking a question is not creating friction. It's exercising a right. One more angle. Isn't it possible that the camera changed the dynamic? Renata looked at him. The recording changed nothing about what actually happened. It only changed whether there would be a record of it. Bowman had no further questions. He walked back with the careful gait of a man who understood his professional best was not going to be sufficient. The footage played. First, Renata's phone recording, clear, steady, exactly what she had described. Then Dever's body camera, the document exchange, the escalation, the field sobriety test, in complete unambiguous entirety. Renata walking the line, past turning, passing, everything passing. Then the citation being written, then Renata drives away. Her taillights disappear. Dever's hands come into frame, the federal identification card lifted again. Eyes moving across it. The small tilt of his head, the nod, the citation book. 11 seconds, Vivienne played it twice. Nobody moved during either viewing, not one person. Because there are moments when the truth is so plain that commentary would only make it smaller. Bowman called Dever to testify. He answered questions evenly. Procedure, training, discretionary authority. The framework that held until it had to hold against 11 seconds and couldn't. Then Vivienne stood up. In that footage, there is no moment captured showing the plaintiff's vehicle drifting. I observed it before the camera angle captured it. You received her federal identification. Among other documents, did you read the name on it? A pause of a man deciding something. I may have. After she drove away, you picked it up again. You read it. You nodded. You reach for your citation book. In that sequence, in 11 seconds, a pause. Is that what happened? The room was past quiet, on the other side of quiet, where there is no sound because the air itself is waiting. Dever looked at the table for 5 full seconds. Then he looked up. Not at Vivienne, not at the jury. Across the room, at Renata. Bowman's hand came up immediately. Dever looked at him, put his own hand flat on the rail. Bowman stopped, because there was something in Dever's face that had not been there an hour ago. Something that was not weakness, not collapse, not performed contrition. Something harder than all of those things. The specific private courage of a man who has run out of road. I saw her name, Dever said, to the room. I knew she was military, and I wrote the citation anyway. The silence. Held, I don't have a good reason for that. I've spent 5 weeks trying to find one. I don't have one. Ha looked at Renata. She looked back, not with triumph, not with anger, with the clear, still expression of someone who has been waiting for a particular truth to enter a room and is watching it arrive. I was wrong, Dever said. 3 words, without legal cushioning, without institutional vocabulary, just, I was wrong. And the weight of 3 words, said plainly by a man who had spent 16 years in the language of authority, filled that courtroom in a way no argument had. Judge Pruitt looked at Dever for a long moment, then turned to the jury. We'll recess for deliberation 4 hours and 11 minutes. Renata sat in the corridor, back straight, hands still. She thought about Derek. In sociology right now, she would call him first, whatever the moment contained. The verdict came at 3:47 p.m. on the matter of OC versus Dever, on the charge of unlawful traffic stop and detention of a federal employee without documented probable cause. We, the jury, find in favor of the plaintiff. The room breathed. On the charge of targeted enforcement based on race. We, the jury, find in favor of the plaintiff. Judge Pruitt set her glasses on her nose. The defendant is ordered to pay damages of $42,000. The complete case file is to be forwarded to the Colorado State Civil Rights Division and the Department of Justice. The Pueblo Police Department is ordered to produce a documented internal review within 90 days. She set the papers down. The 5 prior complaints he previously marked closed will be reopened for independent assessment. 5, not 4, 5 people on that road. 5 files now open. 5 names in a record that could not be unmarked. Court is adjourned. Nobody cheered. Which was right. This was not a game. This was 12 people deciding what was true. And what was true was something wrong had been done. And it was now permanent. Not a revolution, just one thing. On the record. Somewhere it could not disappear. Outside, 4 reporters waited. Renata walked past at her normal pace. One called her name. She turned. The court found what happened was wrong. I hope that finding is used to make sure it happens less. She turned back, kept walking. She called Derek at 6:15. He picked up before the 3rd ring. What happened? We won. The sound from his end wasn't quite a word. The release of some held tense for 5 weeks. Are you happy? She thought about it honestly. I'm satisfied, she said. That is very you, Mom. He laughed. Small, real, something released in her chest that she hadn't entirely known was still held. I'm proud of you, he said. Not as comfort, as fact. Thank you, babe. Don't tell anyone I called you babby. I will tell everyone. Bigger laugh. Then love you. Love you back. She walked to Derek's room, stood in the doorway in the lamplight, his books, his desk, the graduation photo, both of them squinting into the sun. She reached in, turned off the lamp. Cormac Dever sat in the courthouse parking lot for 31 minutes, not crying, not collapsing, just sitting with it. Real things don't resolve cleanly. They settle, find a new weight distribution, become something you carry differently. Ryan had texted at 4:07, saw the news. Call me when you can. Not you should be ashamed, not silence. Call me when you can. More generosity than he'd earned, he called. 3rd ring, Dad. Hey, you okay? Not really. But I'm working on it. A longer pause. Okay, Ryan said. That was enough. For right now, exactly enough. 3 weeks after the verdict, Dever submitted a request to the Community Liaison Office. A civilian ride-along program. Nobody asked him to. Marsh didn't know. Bowman didn't know. He filled out the form before his shift. Dropped it in the box. Went to work. Nobody noticed. Which was the point. Some things aren't done to be noticed. Some things are done because there's a gap between who you were and who you could still be. And the only way across is to start walking. Quietly. One step at a time. 6 weeks after the verdict, Renata stood before 43 new recruits. She didn't bring notes. How many of you think the rank on your shoulder will make people respect you? Some hands. The rank tells people what authority you have, not who you are. And who you are is the only thing that holds. She told them the story. Not the legal specifics, just the shape. A woman, a dark road, a man with a badge and 16 years of unchecked instincts. What it cost him when they finally were questioned. I didn't do it because I was angry. I did it because I have a son who drives on these roads. And because 5 people before me signed papers and stayed quiet because they didn't have what I had. That signing became permission. Permission for it to happen. She looked around the room. When you have the resources to refuse that silence, you owe it to the people who couldn't. The room held the quiet of young people understanding something for the first time. Irreversible. Your uniform is a commitment. Not to an institution. to the people it's supposed to serve. She picked up the folder. Signal of ending. Lead with character. And when you see something wrong, don't calculate whether it's worth it. The cost of silence is always higher than you think. She stepped back. No applause. She wasn't there for applause. She was there because 43 people were about to carry authority into the world. And he had something true to give them. She'd given it. That was enough. That night she sat at the kitchen table. Same lamp, same quiet. The citation was still in her evidence folder. No longer needed. But there, a reminder a Wednesday night on a federal highway. Of a choice made at 1 a.m. at this same table. Of 5 people whose files were now open. Of Derek, 400 miles away, driving on roads that were maybe slightly less dark. Slightly. She knew what slightly cost. She knew it wasn't enough. But it was real. Documented. Permanent. Sometimes one person doing the right thing at the right time hands something forward to the people who caught her. Not safety guaranteed. Not justice complete. Just something real where nothing had been before. A door slightly more open than it was. She turned off the lamp, walked down the hall, stood in Derek's doorway for a moment in the dark. Then she went to bed and slept.